So, welcome to today's podcast. I'm really excited. I have a special guest today. Someone I got to know. We spent some time in Vegas at the Nelson Nash sort of Institute or think tank. So, it was really exciting. I have Becca Wilhite here with me, who's an authorized infinite banking practitioner, right? That's a mouthful, but we'll learn more about that. I know we've talked a little bit about that. And she owns Salient Solutions based out of Plainview, Texas, right? So,
That's right.
Becca, I really appreciate you spending a little time with me and sharing your little journey. So, welcome.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah, before we were recording, we were talking about this at the time of this recording in March. So it's a fun time, springtime and basketball season. So a lot of fun things going on. So today we want what reason we brought Becca on? She's a recently sort of became an authorized infinite banking practitioner. And I always want to hear about how people come across the infant banking concept, right? When I first heard of it, it kind of threw me off. I thought it was some sort of marketing scheme. I didn't understand anything about it. So it's always interesting to hear from folks who have come from different sort of perspectives around finance to understand what their encounter was. So Becca, could you share a little bit about sort of your first off before you get into your background and sort of how you arrived to being a practitioner?
Yeah, you bet. I feel like I have a very unconventional way. I guess everybody's story is unique, but it's kind of funny now because I had a friend who had kind of gotten into the insurance space and learned a little bit about whole life insurance and how that could be beneficial, and was kind of going around practicing her presentation on her friends. And we had a mutual friend, and she said, "Well, what do you think? She's coming around doing these things. Do you think you should listen? I think you would really like what she has to say." And I'm like, sorry, I already know it's about whole life, and I've been trained my whole life that whole life is a scam, right? And that's a terrible place to put money. And so it's dead on arrival for me. I don't even want to listen. So I don't think you could have been more of a skeptic or closed-minded than I was. I didn't even want to hear about it. So kind of time passed, and this whole idea is making the rounds in my circle of friends, right? And I had another friend who was going to go to this presentation, and she asked me to come with her. She said, "I know you kind of know about finance from a layman's perspective. I wasn't in the financial industry or anything. She said, I just want to see what you think." So I didn't want her to make a big mistake and get drug into this thing. I'm sure they mean well. I'm sure it sounds good. So the only reason I went was to protect my friend, right? I don't want you to get scammed. And so I hear this presentation about how participating whole life works, what it can do, some of the good reasons to use it in your financial picture. And it made me kind of curious because it was so different than the message that I'd always heard. Now I didn't know how whole life worked. I didn't understand it. I just had already decided it was bad. And so, as fate would have it, this was in 2020, and shortly after that, COVID hit our household. And we were very fortunate in that we weren't super sick. We were just stuck at home for a really long time, like a month. And so I decided, well, I've got all this time on my hands. I am going to prove that this lady's wrong. So I can just put this to bed once and for all. And so I started doing my own research on the internet, and you quickly find that there's conflicting messages, right, about what this even is, about what it does, what products to use, that kind of thing. But eventually landed at the Nelson Nash Institute and thought, okay, well, this is where it all started, apparently. So I'm going to order this book. And long story short, I just really started reading over that time period. And in my efforts to prove this wrong, I kept saying, well, I didn't know that's how that worked. Or, oh, really? Like, that's really not what I thought that financial vehicle did. Like, all these things, just these little light bulb moments, one after another. And slowly but surely, I mean, obviously, I guess you see where I ended up, a full 180 to say, oh my gosh, I've got to teach people about this. This is incredible. This could bring so much freedom to so many people. So, I mean, I just came from complete skeptic, and through education, through I thought I knew it all, right? I thought this was a complete waste of time. But even with wrong motivations, even with trying to come in to prove it wrong, that the truth of the education I received still overcame that. And I was like, wow, this is something that could change lives. So that's kind of how I got here.
Great. Yeah, it's crazy. And I didn't come from a finance background either, but I was always interested in finance and reading about it. It was always the same, right? It was always
Hmm.
whether it's Dave Ramsey or even Susie Orman, whoever it was, like that you
Yeah.
would listen to. I was listening to them early too, and I just said, "Oh, this is like the biggest scam," even though it's been around for forever. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it was a scam people would figure out like and stop doing or using this tool. So it is quite
Yeah.
amazing. And I first I remember the first time I came across Becoming Your Own Banker book, I had to read it a few times in a row
Hmm.
because I was like, this is such an odd sort of thought, and it just didn't click immediately. It was obviously counter to a lot of what I'd ever come across. So it's quite amazing that this is kind of one of those secrets that's almost sitting in plain sight. It's just that
Even as
when
I
you
was
hide.
learning about this, I would have these moments of clarity, like, okay, I get it. And then the next day I'd be like, oh wait, now how did it? I liken it to when you wake up from a dream, and at first you're like, oh, I remember my dream so clearly, and then you can just lose it in an instant. I feel like that was kind of my process with learning about IBC. Is I would feel like, oh, I understand, and then wait, now how did that work? Just I don't know. It just takes a while to retrain your brain to think so differently than what we've been taught.
Yeah. So when you first and trying to recollect like kind of the initial stages as you were learning, like what was the hardest part to really grasp? Because sometimes I think when you really boil it down, a lot of it's fairly straightforward, but our
Hmm.
mind goes into sort of complicated mode. We're trying to analyze it. You and I
Right.
are similar. Like we like to dig in and sort of completely look at it from different ways. And it's like our analytical brain can sometimes get in the way. So what was
Absolutely.
it that was the initial sort of challenges or things that sort of like made your head shake a little bit and say, "Let's look at this again."
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is just my attitude towards debt and my viewpoints towards
Mm,
debt because I we have in my whole life have been taught don't go into debt if you can help it. Pay cash, save up, pay cash. And so that's just how I've lived my whole life. And so to think about taking a loan from the insurance company, that felt very like, oh, no, you're not supposed to do that, right? I didn't realize that by paying cash, I was giving up the opportunity for all that future growth because you pay cash and your money's gone forever. And so when Nelson says in his book that you finance everything you buy, you either pay interest to someone else or you give up interest that your money could have earned, that kind of that was just kind of an aha moment for me of wow, yeah, like that's true. I never thought of it that way. And I still not wrong to pay cash. There's not a right or wrong, I don't think necessarily in any of this. It's just what's your perspective and is what you've believed really true? Are you coming from a point that's true or are you just coming from a point of oh that's just how it's always been done. That's just how
yeah.
you do it. And so I think that was kind of the most difficult thing for me to wrap my mind around is okay, yes, you're taking a loan, but you're taking a loan from a company that you're a part owner in, right? And so when you pay that loan back, when you pay interest back into that system, you're paying back in a system that you're a part owner in that's going to profit you, that's going to come back to you instead of going to someone else. It's like you're building through this process, you're building your own asset instead of building someone else's. And I think that's what's really powerful in this whole concept that people overlook of, man, I'm building an asset here. It's not just money, poof, that's gone forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really it. I mean, you said the compounding, right? You're cutting that off. And I used to be the same way. Like debt was like evil. And I remember paying cash for a car and I was just so proud of myself. Right. I
Yeah,
just
yeah,
basically,
great. That's amazing.
yeah, I'm the smart guy. Like I'm not going to pay these guys any interest. But to your point, like that compound curve just ceased, right,
Right.
forever. And I always joke with some people sometimes, like, how many compound curves do you have in your lifetime? You have one, right? It's just the longer you can
Hmm.
keep it going, the better. But
Yeah,
we can easily just
absolutely.
because right.
Yeah, I think that I had just a thought yesterday about how we're taught versus the infinite banking concept. And really it's just the same things in different order. And I might have gotten this from Joe DeFazio. He's a mutual friend of ours. We talked about this at the think tank, so I want to maybe give him credit for this thought process. But we're taught to buy something that we need, borrow the money to go pay for it, and then in doing that, we're building someone else's asset, right? So we buy, we borrow, we build someone else's asset. So what Nelson's saying in Becoming Your Own Banker is, let's just do that in a different order. Let's build the asset first. Let's save into this policy, right? Then borrow against it. Then go buy the things. And then by doing it that way, you're building your own asset, like we just said, instead of someone else's. If we just change the order, that's all we're saying. Just change the order of how you're doing things.
Yeah, and it's just amazing when you think about thinking like a banker, right, and a business
Mm-hmm.
owner, right? And I always joke when you go, who has the fanciest buildings, right, that you can walk into. Everything I go to the bank here, it's like the fanciest thing ever, right? Everything's luxury, like they're controlling everything, right?
Yeah.
And they're building assets, right? And we're just blindly, and I'm speaking my own self, like just feeding the money that they can continue to use our money for other purposes and maybe loan
Mm-hmm.
to my neighbor. And so,
Right.
but they're building up assets, right? So it's a really different, to your point, subtle shift, but very important when you really factor in the long term of it, right? And
Oh,
thinking,
absolutely.
you know, you know, long term, thinking long term, a lot of things that we can easily get trapped in, I think, is because it's short term thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we sometimes can miss the bigger picture of it all, which is sometimes easy to do when you just get bombarded with the same sort of messaging from the typical financial world.
Sure. And I think that's
So
another challenge that people face, that I faced, is this seems so different, even though it's really not so different. But then nobody wants to be the pioneer, right? They're like, well, is anybody else doing this? Am I the only one, right? And why is everybody else doing this if it's so great? And so there's that hurdle to overcome of just seeing something for what it is and thinking differently, rethinking your thinking, and not having to go with the crowd. And I think that can be difficult when you try to share this with other people and they tell you that's stupid. Why would you do that? That whole life is a terrible place to put money. Everybody knows that, right? And sometimes I think people lack the confidence to really explain. Like they get it, but not enough to explain it to somebody else. And so then they're like, oh, well, why am I doing this? Do I really understand what I'm doing? And so I don't know. It's just anything new it takes a little bit of faith, right, to step out and try something that's not mainstream yet. I think this is gaining a lot of popularity, but that can be a challenge.
yeah, you're right, and I think the power of conformity is so
Mm-hmm.
strong. We want to fit in. We want to kind of feel which is all great. We want a community. We want to feel there's safety in numbers, however you want to describe it. But it's very difficult to sort of go off on your own, to so to speak, to do something that's against the grain. But as I've grown in sort of learning and wisdom, I almost feel like every time I hear something that everyone's doing, I almost say the opposite's probably the better way. I just have
Right.
this natural instinct these days because marketing and so much in the world we live in with so much information,
Mm-hmm.
we're being fed certain things in certain in ways, and you almost kind of say, well, marketing is powerful,
Yeah.
and unless you sort of scrutinize it and to your point, like really dig in and try to be objective and learn about it, you kind of just assume things and
I have
you're
a
not going to test it.
I have a friend who says that we are the product not of financial education, but of financial marketing. Like that's most of what we are. That's we've learned financial marketing. I think Ryan Griggs talks about all the time that I'm going to say this wrong, but basically the training programs for traditional finance have one textbook and it's about the psychology of marketing. Like what? Like that's what that's what that's what we're selling people. I don't know. I'm not trying to be too harsh because I think I really do think that most people are trying to do the right thing. And it's not that they're trying to be evil or mislead people. It's just like these ideas have been passed on throughout the years.
Yes.
And are we really getting the results that we thought we would? That's kind of one of the things that turned me on to this because I had started when I first started working, I think I was 24, 26, something like that. Um, and I had started a Roth IRA thinking this is the really smart thing to do. Now, I still have it to this day. I don't think it's bad. But when I started learning about IBC, I was just very curious because I was pitched the whole, it's going to average 8% a year. And this is what I did. I went home and I typed into a compound interest calculator. Okay, if I do this every month, 8% a year average, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a millionaire. I'm going to be rich, right? And so here I am, like 20 years down the road, and we go through seasons, right? I contributed more some years and less. We had kids and we had to back off, all those things. But I called up the company and I just said, hey, can you just tell me like how much I've put in, what the value is now? I just want to know those totals. So they gave me the numbers and I just did some really simple fifth grade math, right? And I came up with an average annual rate of return of, it was somewhere in the fours, 4 point something, right? And so I'm thinking, okay, well that explains why I'm not rich yet, because this isn't 8, like whoever Dave Ramsey says you can get 12, whatever. And I was just so confused because I was like, this isn't what I thought. So I had my annual review a couple of weeks later, and like they hand me the prospectus and say, hey, your account's doing great. It's averaging 8.7%, just like we said. It's doing amazing. And I was like, okay, but I'm confused. Can you just explain to me, this is what I did, this is the math I did, and this is what I got, and then this is, how do you do your math? And she just said, well, it's complicated, and the formula that we use, when a computer does it, it would go around the block, and it just, you can't just do it on a piece of paper. And I wasn't going to argue with her, but I was still like, what? This is not adding up to me. And so what made me understand was when I learned that average interest rates are not the same as actual interest rates, right? And that when we look at a historical average of, say, a stock or whatever it is, you might have a positive average, but they're not taking into account that every time it goes down, it takes twice as much to get back to where you were before. So that was the difference. That was the difference between me being rich, like I thought I was going to be, and just like, well, that was okay. And add to that the fact that I really couldn't get to that. I mean, there's some rules. I could have gotten to some of it if I wanted to, but then you can't really put it all back. And it's just so complicated. And so when I saw this, I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to get a decent rate of return. It's never going to go down. And I can use it. If I need to use it to go do something, it's there. I mean, that's just such an incredibly freeing realization for me. Like, wow, I'll make that trade a couple of, maybe the potential for more growth over here if I can just have it and use it and have that available and just be in control of that whole system. So that was a big aha to me.
Yeah, that is. I mean, the math. There's a phrase out there. Money is not like we try to talk about money and we apply math to it and equations and projections and that's not really how money works, right? And to your point, like even your example of average versus actual, I mean, it's the impact that losses have on our future growth is sizable, right? And you just sometimes can easily miss that because you get bombarded with these, hey, yeah, it's definitely average of 12%, and just put it into the calculator and you magically appear 30 years later.
Right.
Well, that's not reality. Life changes all the time, right? And losses occur,
absolutely.
and those are painful, right? And that's real. So that's why, to your point, and that's why for folks who understand and sort of learn about the infinite banking concept, and it's not an investment. We always sort of push that, say that's not an investment, but it's a place that money is stored, and we can control our cash management system, right, to deploy for other things. That's really, to me, it was also a big sort of epiphany to understand that I'm not only controlling my own wealth, but be able to use it for other purposes while it's still kind of continue to grow, right? And that's a very different animal than what most people come across because it's usually an either or type of thing, right? We're trying to sort of be more expansive and say, well, how can we have our dollars do more, right? More for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the power of infinite banking. So I'm sure it's been interesting as you've sort of progressed in your practice and talking to others. Like, what's that experience been like to now share this because you're now compelled to share this magic thing we found? Like, what's that? What those conversations like? How's it been?
Well, it's interesting because most of the people that I talk to in my business have never heard of this. I mean, we're just starting from square one. And so if they're just kind enough maybe to sit down and hear about it. But my goal is always just to make people curious. Because that's how I came into this, right? I got curious. I was not a believer, but what I heard made me curious because I don't think there's any way that I can sit down with anyone for 30 minutes or an hour and they walk away saying, "Oh, I completely understand." Like there's too much to it, right? But I think that if I can walk away and they say, "Hey, maybe I would read that book. Maybe there's something in there that maybe there is something to this. I'll at least maybe learn about it." Then I consider that a success because I'm not here to push this on anybody. I'm here to invite people into a journey. And if you want to go on it, then great. And if you're happy with where you are, then that's okay too. But I think everybody at least deserves to know that this is an option, that there's something else out there that's a different way of thinking about money and thinking about finance. And you don't have to go all in. Like, I don't know, Nelson had what, 49 policies at one point in his life and ran everything he had through these policies. And that's amazing. But you don't have to do that, right? There's a level of buy-in here. I have clients that just use it as kind of a savings system. They just want to use it for an emergency fund. That's great. I have other clients who are wanting to build and expand and grow their systems, and that's fantastic too. But I feel like in my own experience, it took me having a policy and using the policy to realize the power of this. It's like Nelson says, it's more caught than taught. So when you actually do have a policy and you actually do take that loan and go do the things you were going to do anyway, and you see how your account continues to grow, and you're like, oh, wow, this really does what they said. It really does what it's supposed to do. And I see that in my clients too. I got a text this morning from just one of my favorites. And she said, I just had an epiphany. Like, we're expecting this insurance check to pay off the surgery, but if I put it in my policy first, then I could borrow from the policy and then put it back and it's going to be more than we had. Yes, yes, you're exactly right. And so it's really neat. It's rewarding to see those light bulbs go off with other people too, and they're excited. They're excited because, wow, this works, and this feels
Right.
very freeing.
That's it. And experience and experiencing firsthand is always great. I mean, anything read all the fancy finance stuff. I mean, until you see it for real and sort of
Mm-hmm.
experience it, it sometimes is hard, right? And we get that. And so, as long as folks are open minded and are willing to at least learn and step into it, those are the types of people that benefit greatly from the infinite banking concept because they're already open minded and then they sort of continue to learn. And it
Mm-hmm.
takes some time, right? And to your point,
True.
it's not an all or nothing sort of proposition, right? You kind
Mm-hmm.
of go into it, you're sort of experiencing it, and you'll see if it's worth expanding or not. And I have clients who
Mm-hmm.
now have started to finally, after a few years into it, they're like, "Oh my God, I wish I'd started this 10 years ago." Um,
Yeah.
and I said, know that it's hard. I get it. Um, so one of the things and I know this is a problem too, and I didn't grow up as in my family talking about finances all that much, right? It's one of those taboo topics.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I have found, and I don't know if this is the same with you, Becca, is like it's given me a easier avenue to talk about finances with my children and expand their thinking around finances because my son who got had his first finance class, what do they talk about? The stock market. That's the first
Sure.
entry point,
Yeah.
right? That's typically what's happening. And so this has allowed the infinite banking concept and the concept of cash management have allowed me to have some conversations with my children a little bit more so. And so how has that sort of impacted you? Have you sort of seen that too as an entryway to have conversations around finances with your family and children?
Yeah. Well, to be real honest, I think my kids kind of know what I do, right? But I've tried to kind of to be real open about like we're saying, having those conversations around finances. And a couple of years back, my parents had been saving to help my kids with their college expenses. And that's something
Mm.
my grandparents did for us. And it was just a huge blessing. And so they're kind of continuing that on. And they had a fund set up in some stocks or whatever for that purpose. And so we just started having this conversation of what would this look like, again, thinking long term, right? If instead of just a college fund, what if we could extend this past that to something they could use throughout their lives? And so we're talking the pros and cons of maybe taking that money and opening policies on the kids. And so I was talking to my oldest son, who's 12 at the time. And I said, hey, would you rather have some money to help with college? I mean, it's not going to pay for the whole thing, but maybe it'll pay for your books or help with your dorm or whatever. Have that money, pay for those things, and then it's gone. And then you just go on about your way. Or would you rather have something that you could borrow and then pay back later when you get a job and then use it again and pay it back and just use it throughout your life, time over and over? And he just looked at me kind of confused and he said, well, duh, the second one. Like that was completely clear to him. So we ended up doing that, and I'm very thankful for my parents' generosity in doing that and funding some policies for them or getting them started at least. And we'll have decisions down the road. Do you guys want to take these over and continue to fund them or not? I mean, there's just so many options, but we're starting to teach them about the value. I actually got an annual statement on my daughter's policy yesterday, and I was just showing her. I was like, hey, this is the cash value in your policy. She's 13. So in a few years, you're probably going to want a vehicle. You're going to want to get around on your own. This is something maybe we could borrow this from this contract from the insurance company, buy you a car, and she babysits. You can make good money babysitting. I'm telling you what, it's the way to go. But and pay that back. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds good. So
That,
there's just I feel like it just gives you so many options. And you can still go to the bank and take a loan if you need to. It doesn't eliminate that
Mhm.
option. It just, to me, it makes that plan B instead of plan A. And who doesn't want more options?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's amazing. Like, and even to go further down the road, as I think of my kids are a little bit older and one's getting into college, and before I know it, he'll have maybe get married someday and have children of his own. And that putting policies on my children, people are like, that's insane. Well, I've actually one started their own sort of compounding curve early as
Hmm.
possible, and I've actually protected my unborn grandchildren that are not
Hmm.
even in existence today.
Isn't
And
that
I look
neat?
at those sort of things, and it's like for me personally, it warms my heart to think that something like that we've done that, and I didn't think about it when we originally did it, and that this is something that can perpetuate for generations to come,
Absolutely.
right? Of the
Well, I think
family.
about that situation with my parents. So let's say they're generation one, right? And then we're actually the owners of the policy. They pay for it, but we own it. So that's generation two. Okay. And then it's insuring my children, generation three, right? And then someday, way into the future, 80 years from now or whatever, when they pass away, that's going to leave a death benefit to generation four. All because they decided to put this into place. And I think that's incredible. I don't know, like, there's a scripture in the Bible in Proverbs that says that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And I think that was always really intimidating for me because I would read something like that and I'd be like, well, that's great, but I'm hoping we even get to leave anything to our kids, right? I hope we leave something to just a one generation. But now, like in understanding how money can work for you in these kinds of strategies, I just, oh yeah, we can absolutely do that, and this is going to be fun, and this is just going to build, and it's just going to compound and snowball, and in each generation, I mean, my ceiling is going to be their floor, right? And isn't that what we want in all things, not just finance, but we want to set our kids up to have a head start in life, and I don't think that's cheating. I think that's being smart, right? And making sacrifices today so that the generations after us have an easier time or have resources to go start that business or to go make that investment or whatever it is, that they're not always just starting from zero. So I just think it's really
Absolutely.
powerful.
It is. It is. And I've certainly run across most people I talk to about it would love to. It's just that they may not know how, right?
Sure.
And they
Yeah.
don't like they may not think it's even reasonable to think you could do it, right? Because I could barely have enough for my own self to
Yeah.
live. And so I get it, but this is why it's infinite, and that's why I love the word infinite because there's so much possibilities associated with it, what you can do with it, how you control it, and where it could sort of end up in the future. It's makes it
Sure.
a much more exciting sort of thing other
Yeah.
than just talking about whole life insurance, which
Sure.
is not
Yeah.
everyone
And
wants
I think
to talk
maybe
about.
a misconception is that you have to be rich to do this. And I mean, we're just very normal people. Like our family is not super wealthy, super affluent, anything like that. But I think just starting, even if you start small, it's going to make a difference, like you said, in the long term. If you're looking down the road to different generations, and golly, you could completely change your family tree just by starting somewhere.
So one of the things that relates this to, and I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about it, was just a tremendous book called Beaver Bankers that you wrote,
Go
and it's just
Beaver
a
Bankers.
beautifully illustrated. It's just a heartwarming sort of book. And so tell me a little bit about that. Like, what was the genesis of that, and how that got going, and hope
Yeah.
for
Well, I never set out to write a children's book. If you would have told me that was in my bingo cards, I would have probably laughed. But I was a teacher previously. I taught English and coached basketball in junior high. So I always tried to, felt like analogies were very beneficial in helping kids grasp concepts and that kind of thing. And so I was just thinking in regards to infinite banking, what are some real world analogies that might help people connect the dots a little bit? And I'm a person of faith, and I feel like sometimes I get little drops, little downloads, like thoughts that are smarter than I am, and I'm like, oh, thank you, that's a great idea. But I just one day, just really out of the blue, I thought about beavers and thought, huh, they're trying to control the flow of the water by making a dam, creating this environment that would protect them and provide for their needs and all. And I was, maybe I'm gonna go research beavers. I didn't know anything about beavers, right? But so I'm googling it and reading, and I found out all these incredible things. Like I thought they lived in the dam. They don't live in the dam. They build the dam so that they can create the pond, and then they build this lodge over here, and that's where they live, and they create all these tunnels and ways of getting to things they need more efficiently. And I'm like, whoa, that's what we do here. Like infinite banking, our policy is not an investment, right? But it creates a way to get the things we need more efficiently and easier and more safely, and our families protected. Just anyway, I'm just seeing all these analogies. So I just had this idea in my head for, I don't know, several months, and then one day I just had a Sunday afternoon, and I decided, hey, I'm going to sit down and write that down, just write out a little story, just to do it, I guess, and then shared it with some people, some colleagues, and they were really encouraging me. Oh man, you need to make this into a book, and it just one thing led to another, and I've been really pleased. I think it's been really well received, and two, in that, I did want a way to teach my kids because I can't really give my 9-year-old becoming your own banker. I mean, he's probably not gonna. He's a smart kid, but he's not gonna grasp that. But he can understand a story about a beaver, and so it just planting those seeds of the concept. Now, can you learn everything you need to know about infinite banking from a story of a beaver? Of course not, but you can understand the overall concept of, okay, this water in this river was flowing away from them forever. They were vulnerable to predators because they're not very fast on land. They need an environment where they're protected and where they can thrive, right? So they control the flow. They do something to stop that water from running away and or flowing away from them, and create this system where it's available to them, where they can use it, where they can be protected, where they can thrive in their families. And this is something interesting too. I thought some of these beaver dams have been around for 100 years. Like the I don't know how long a beaver lives. I'll have to look that one up, right? But there's multiple generations that are using the same pond because
That's
of the
incredible.
beavers that went before. So that's kind of the idea, and I hope that it's helpful in passing this down, because we don't want this to be like a one and done. Like, okay, well, we did this thing that was neat for us, and then our kids oh, I've got all this cash value. Shoot, I'm going to go buy a fancy car and never pay the loan back, right? We don't want it to die with the next generation, because if we'll continue to nurture this and foster it and take care of it, it's just going to grow bigger and really be infinite. It could last generations or longer. We've seen people, families that have done that we can look to. So it's very possible. So
That's
that's
awesome.
kind of
No,
the summary of the Beaver book.
no, it's awesome, and I would highly encourage you to go get it. And it's on Amazon, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I shared it with my kids who were teenagers, and they got it immediately, right? It was just
Yeah.
easy. It was just well written, and I was like, oh, this got to be a future Disney movie or something, right? It's
When
really,
I say,
really
I tell people sometimes it's disguised as a children's book, but I really think it can help adults as well to kind of connect those dots, or maybe see it in a different way of, oh, yeah, okay, that's what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to dam up the water. We're just trying to stop the flow of money from flowing away from us forever, right? And create some sort of environment where we can keep more of it. So that's the
no,
idea.
that's beautiful. Absolutely. Listen, that's a great way to sort of encapsulate this conversation. I mean, a lot of it is staying open-minded, right? Exploring things and finding ways you can control more of your wealth, because, and I think it help you control your life too, right? That you have a little bit more access to capital to do the things you want in your life. So it's kind of all encompassing. And so Becca, I really appreciate your time sharing your thoughts along the way here. And I would definitely go out and get the Beaver Bankers book. Is awesome, and I really appreciate you sharing your history with us, and I wish you the best as you move forward. So thanks for
Well,
joining me today.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This has been really fun, and just the best of everything to you, Tom. Wow, this has been a good time.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Becca. Thanks for joining me on this episode today. I really am grateful for you as listeners to the Perennial Pride podcast. I hope you're getting some tremendous value out of it and hopefully pushing you along your journey to financial freedom. I put this podcast together really to help help you get more educated around your finances so you feel empowered to live the life that you really want. And if you like the content that you heard today or watched, then I would encourage you to go to my website, perennialpride.com. There's tons of other content there. And you can access my book, Wealth Beyond the Numbers. You can buy it there on my website. It's a aggregation of a lot of great tips and tools I've learned to not only build my wealth in my accounts, but build wealth in my life and abundance and joy, and something that has a lot of my experiences in the journey that I've been on personally. Hopefully that can be also of value to you as you sort of move forward. So thanks again for being a Perennial Pride listener, and we'll see you on the next episode.